Hey, everybody, and welcome to Lore Friday. I'm your host, DM Gallibond. This is Lore Friday for Friday, May 8th, 2020, and today we are going to be looking at an overview to the Princes of the Apocalypse campaign. We just finished up going through a section-by-section review of the Tyranny of Dragons campaign, and now we're going to move on to the next campaign that was published for 5th edition, and that is the Princes of the Apocalypse. All right, so what we're going to do today, because this campaign is structured a little bit differently, we're going to do something we didn't do for Tyranny of Dragons, and that is give you kind of an overview of the entire campaign. So the main campaign story in Princes of the Apocalypse is designed for levels 3 up through middle of tier 3, so level 12, level 13. And the main storyline does not present adventures in the order that's appropriate for the party. The way the adventures are presented is they are presented kind of geographically and thematically, but that doesn't track with where your party's levels are. So as a DM, you have to kind of skip around in the adventure, which can make it a little bit confusing if you're going to run it as a single campaign. It also is something that lends itself to, like I like doing, pulling sections of the campaign out as individual adventures, reskinning the monsters, repopulating the locations, renaming the towns and everything, and then plopping them into a new adventure or a new homebrew setting, if you will. So there's a separate section at the end of the main campaign that offers players the abilities to raise characters from level 1 through 3 by playing through a lead-in to the main storyline. Now, that lead-in also gives your players a little better sense of the geography of where it is that the rest of the campaign will take place. Now, there's little guidance in the campaign for the order of play, and as a DM, you kind of have to determine the level by verifying the CR of the encounters contained into it, if you are going into it cold. Fortunately, there's a lot of resources out there on the internet, and I'll be talking about one of those that allows you to have like a little better guide as to what level each of the sections of the campaign is appropriate for. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the origins of this campaign. Now, Tyranny of Dragons kind of felt like it was written from scratch, using maybe a couple of ideas from here, a couple of ideas from there, and put all together. But the Princess of the Apocalypse is really the spiritual descendant of the Temple of Elemental Evil from AD&D days. Now, the Temple of Elemental Evil was published in 1985, and it became one of the legendary campaigns of classic D&D. It was set in the world of Greyhawk, and it introduced, some really iconic places like the village of Hamlet. It also introduced the abandoned moat house near Hamlet, which for I don't know how many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of adventuring groups, that became their first, party home base. Because it gave you an old ruined moat house that you as a party could go and clear out, and nobody really owned it. And so a lot of times, a lot of parties could talk a DM into saying, "Hey, well, why can't we move in there, fix the place up? We got a few thousand gold from, clearing out all the bandits and all the monsters and all the cultists and everything out of here." And so they just turned it into a home base for their party as they, adventured around in that area. It the Temple of Elemental Evil in AD&D also introduced the concept of demiplanes. Now, in this particular campaign, it was called nodes, and each of those nodes was tied to one of the elemental planes. So you get elemental plane of air, earth, fire, and water. It also introduced the demon lord Zugtmoy, who is the fungal ruler of the 222nd plane of the abyss, and that was the archfiend and the final boss of the adventure. Now, they didn't really have challenge ratings in AD&D like we do in um, 5th edition, but they had basically the equivalent of that was the hit dice of the monster. And Zugtmoy in this particular edition was a 49 hit die monster. And the idea is that if it was going to be a solo that you were going to put up against your party, then the levels of the party should add up to the number of hit dice of the monster they were fighting. So you would have, basically if you had 7 adventurers, they should be of 7th level each. So 7 times 7, that's 49 to match the power of Zugtmoy as the final boss of this adventure. And this campaign was just chock full of all kinds of stuff. Now, normally before this, adventures that you'd buy at a hobby store might be covered in like a cardstock cover and have paper, paper pages that were stapled together, and it might be 30 or 40 pages long. Well, this thing was 145 pages long. I believe it was originally done as a hardback. It might have been the first campaign ever to be published as a hardback. And it had 2 towns fully fleshed out, a temple with 4 complete dungeon levels underneath it, had 4 demiplanes that we talked about before, a demon lord that we talked about before. Now, the only thing that it lacked that a teenage geek could possibly want was a manual on how to meet and talk to girls. That was the only thing that wasn't in this stupid adventure. It just had all kinds of stuff. All right. So now let's flip our focus back to the Princes of the Apocalypse adventure. Now, how is that one structured? Well, it's structured with 2 full chapters of background. The first chapter deals with the background on the cult of elemental evil. It's what is the history in the world or in the multiverse. And then chapter 2 deals with background on the local setting. This particular adventure is set not in Greyhawk, but in the Forgotten Realms, and more specifically, it is set in the Desserin Valley, which is a part of the Sword Coast. I believe the Desserin Valley sits, I believe it's a little north of Waterdeep and south of Neverwinter and inland some. It's somewhere in that area of the Sword Coast. So then chapter 3 outlines 4 surface strongholds or fortresses that each of the elemental cults has set up. So there's a story when it talks about the background of the cults. The 4 cults, while they all ultimately claim allegiance to something called the Elder Elemental Eye, the cult of air, the cult of fire, the cult of water, and the cult of earth all are in conflict with each other. And so each of those 4 separate cults has their own stronghold above ground. And the reason for those strongholds is that's how they are recruiting people to become part of the cult. Then in chapter 4, you learn about 4 underground temples that each of the cults has set up. So, you have the fortresses above ground, and then you have fully blown temples below ground. And then chapter 5 deals with this central area called the Temple of the Elder Elemental Eye, and the 4 uh, nodes, if you will, or the 4 areas that correspond to the nodes from that AD&D adventure, uh, for the elemental plane of air, fire, earth, and water. And then finally, chapter 6 is where you run into that preliminary adventure that takes you from level 1 through level 3. And you also have a series of adventures called side treks. Now, those side treks are designed to bridge the level gaps between parts of the main adventure. Because even if you plot out the leveling for the pieces of the main adventure in chapters 3 through 5, there's gaps in between them. Well, you can do these 3 things, then you have to raise a level or 2 before you can do this next thing, because if you try to go to that next thing, you'll get killed. So they had to build these side tracks in there so that as a DM you can say, okay, you do this stuff. Oh, wait a minute, there's this side thing over here. You got to do that. And it's got a loose tangent to the main plot, but it's, and maybe you find out something that helps you moving forward in the main story. But it's almost a completely separate, thing that says, oh, shiny thing over here, and, get your attention off of the main task before you can come back to it. So it feels a little, in some ways it feels a little more like a sandbox because it's not just laser focused on this one thing in the way that the Tyranny of Dragons was all the way through, but it's also a little bit scattershot because it lacks that cohesion and focus on that one central goal all the way through. All right, so now over the next few weeks, actually the next few months, I'm going to take Fridays and do a deep dive into these adventures. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to do it by level. And the level guide that I am using is adopted from the Power Score Rating RPG blog, and I have the URL here, and I'll put the URL in the comments at the comments down below in the dibbledy-doo, as Matt Colville says. And so there's 4 parts of the there's 4 adventures that are appropriate for level 1. And the first one is just kind of rolling into Red Larch and getting a flavor of the town. Then there's Bears and Bows, the Haunted Tomb, and the Necromancer's Cave. And in the adventure, for today, I'm using images that come out of the adventure in D&D Beyond, and they give you this nice little area, this nice little map that tells you where all of these different things are. Okay. Then the level 2 adventures that are appropriate are the Bloody Treasure and the Tomb of Moving Stones. As we go to level 3, you have Skyriders, which is your first encounter with actual cultists. These are cultists of elemental air, and as you can tell from the image here, they actually ride giant vultures as mounts. And then there's the Sighing Valley, which is this whole area connected to the cult of elemental air. Feather Gale Spire, which is a structure that you see in the image here. Then New Management is one of the side treks, and the Reaver Ambush is also a side trek. Okay, level 4. For level 4 adventures, you can finally reach the stronghold of the Cult of Elemental Water, which is Riverguard Keep. And then there's a couple of other side adventures. There's the Spy's Letter, Ice Shield Orcs, and one called Tremors, which is, yes, deals with creatures that come from underground that are being disturbed by the activities of the cults elsewhere. All right, and then for level 5, you go to the Sacred Stone Monastery. That is the fortress that where you will run into the Cult of Elemental Earth. Now, a really crazy thing about the Sacred Stone Monastery, and we'll talk more about it when we do the in-depth review. This is an old monastery that was abandoned and later became the home of a lich who became a lich by accident. And he's a lich, which means technically he's evil, but in reality, he was devoted to his brother, who was a paladin. And he is using an underground area of this old monastery in order to build what he considers a mausoleum worthy of his brother's remains. And the cult of Elemental Earth has gotten in there, and the cult of Elemental Earth are too weak to take on the Lich. And the Lich is like, all right, you guys, if you don't bother me, you can stay here. But you start bothering me, I'm gonna get ticked off. And then, of course, when the adventurers come and they start fighting with the cult of Elemental Earth, well, what does that do? That annoys the Lich. So it's kind of a crazy thing there. And then there's a couple of more side adventures that are appropriate at level 5. Okay, then level 6, Curse of the Fire Witch is a side adventure. Then Scarlet Moon Hall is the fire stronghold, the elemental fire stronghold. And then we get to the first one of the actual temples, which is the Temple of Howling Hatred, which is the air cult, the cult of elemental air. Level 7, it's the Temple of the Crushing Wave. And you can see here one of the monsters in there is this aquatic troll, which is, if trolls on land weren't bad enough, then aquatic trolls are pretty nasty. And then Dire Tidings, which is yet another one of the side adventures. Level 8, you have the Veil of Dancing Waters, which is another side adventure. And then the Temple of Black Earth, which is a Temple of Black Earth is the Earth, cult of elemental Earth. And then there's Reckless Hate, which is like a reprisal that, okay, now the party has started annoying the cults, so they're going to start fighting back. And the Reckless Hate is one of those reprisals. Level 9, Dark Dealings in Yartar. The Temple to Elemental Flame, which of course is the underground temple for the Elemental Cult of Fire, or the Cult of Elemental Fire. And then Race to Destruction, that's yet another reprisal against the party. Level 10, you have Rundreth Manor. Now, looks like a drow, and indeed, that is exactly what the occupant of Rundreth Manor wants you to think that she is a drow. But she is not. That's all I'm going to tell you right now. When I get around to detailing the level 10 adventures, I will go more into depth about what exactly this dark lady, as she calls herself, is. And then the Fane of the Eye, that gets into the um, main temple of the Elder Elemental Eye. However, it doesn't go into those areas that are the nodes just yet, as you can see. All right. So the level 11, you have the Halls of the Hunting Axe, which is yet another side adventure. Then the Howling Caves, which is the node for elemental air, and Downpour, which is the node for elemental water. Level 12 adventures, you have Plunging Torrents, Tortured Earth, and Council of Despair. You have the Black Geode, which is the what am I trying to say? That node for the cult of elemental earth. And then Heian the Punisher, that is yet another reprisal against the party from the cults of elemental evil. And then finally, appropriate for level 13, you have the Burning Hills, and you have the Weeping Colossus, which is that node for the elemental fire. And so we will be going through. I'm probably going to try to take 1 week to look at each of these adventures that I have bulleted. So it'll be quite a while getting through this thing. But there's enough detail within these. There's maps and there's different encounters and adventures and different plot points and things like that. And there are things about each of these adventures that, like I say, you can pull out the adventure, use the maps, use the general story of that little adventure, and then toss it into a homebrew world, maybe repopulate it with things that make more sense for your individual game world. All right, and that is our preview of the Princes of the Apocalypse. I hope that you have enjoyed it. If you like what we're doing here on this channel, please hit the subscribe button. I think. It's down there. It's over there. And ring the bell, click the bell. That way you will get a notice every time that I put a new video up. We will be continuing to do these daily video posts, churning out this content for you. So anyway, thank you very much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it. Once again, my name is DM Gallibond. Give me a follow on all the social medias, Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, all of it. It's all in the description of the video later. All right, take care, everybody. Peace out, and good luck with your dice rolls. Good night, everybody.